On a show about detectives and mysteries, except what you get is hot garbage, but at least it has some spicy waifus in it, and this show just might be for you. The Detective Is Already Dead is about a middle schooler named Kimiko Kimizuka, who's literally a trouble magnet, which in the first place is how he ended up getting kidnapped and forced to go overseas to deliver something, which is also how in the same way he quote unquote coincidentally ends up meeting the quote unquote famous legendary detective Siesta. After solving a few cases, Kimizuka agrees to become her assistant, and together they put their lives on the line for dangerous missions that probably not even the FBI could handle well unless they send in an entire SWAT team. Sometimes it just makes you simply wonder why a middle schooler is involved in all these fights. Half of this pretty much just sums up the first half of episode 1. But after all these shenanigans, some certain fool who was voiced by Kirito came in and was threatening to hijack a plane, but he wanted the detective to solve the case as to why he was hijacking it. Afterwards, Siesta then reveals she has some 4,000 IQ intellect who pretty much just solved the entire case before it even happened. Which is probably why she ended up on that plane in the first place. It's also revealed this certain fool they were dealing with was working for an organization named SPES, would potentially be the main villains of this series. After a whole decade of dialogue later, it ended up being worth the while since we get an epic fight scene with Siesta where a certain fool I just mentioned pulls a Kagane from his ear and
3 hours later.
Explorer Kimizuka and Siesta continued their bizarre adventures throughout the years, taking out big criminal organizations and traveling the world until a bit later when we learn a not really big spoiler to be honest, considering episode 2 exists. After the fight scene on the plane, we somehow end up being in a school cultural festival. I honestly can't be bothered to explain why they were even there though. I just know it had something to do with Hanako of the toilet. Now the good part about this is Siesta cosplaying in a wedding dress. Now this was unexpected, but very sugoi, 10 out of 10. Plus I like how they slid in this little comedic joke in there. That like Siesta just ass pulled some flying shoes out of nowhere in a wedding dress and then carrying Kimizuka in their arms and then just jumping out a window. I don't know, I just felt like mentioning that because I just found it kind of funny. Anyways, at the end of the episode, the quote-unquote spoiler, I mentioned earlier, Kimizuka tells us the detective is already dead. Wow. I'm so surprised. I never expected this to happen. Congrats, you made it to the second episode. In this episode, we are at some other random part of the story again, where we already have a time skip to 3 years later, and here I was thinking we'd get more CSS screen time, but instead we do get introduced to this new character who could be potential waifu material. Since she is voiced by Kotori from Data Live, which her name is Natsunagi Nagisa. Anyways, all that aside, this episode is pretty much a whole introduction to Nagisa, and we just learned she has a connection to Siesta. Yes, you heard me right. Siesta gave her heart to her. After that heart transplant, that quote-unquote heart that Siesta gave to Nagisa was just basically craving to see Kimizuka for some reason. Therefore, Nagisa goes to Kimizuka for help since 3 years later he's now a smart boy. And basically turns out that Mr. Obvious was right in front of her. Yes, Kimizuka was the person this quote-unquote owner's heart wanted to see. Then Nagisa decided to become a detective with Kimizuka as a secondary character again. Anyways, this episode so far had absolutely nothing and I say nothing to do with the previous episode at all, but it was still an alright episode. Like regardless, like on its own, it was like an alright, decent episode. But personally, I think they should have just continued off where the last episode was, with all the flashbacks, the days like when Siesta was still alive and stuff. Then later, at the end of the season, or possibly if season 2 ever happens, they could they could just go to the present and like have all the events like we've been having, like episode 2, 3, and 4. But hey, that's just what I think. The show's allowed to do whatever it wants, for all I care. Moving on to the third episode, we start off from the last episode. We meet Saikawa Yui, a popular idol, and she comes to Kamizuka and Nagisa regarding a case or mystery she wants them to solve. So as I said, Nagisa takes it upon herself to become the detective. Anyway, the case that Saikawa wanted them to help with was regarding her family's sapphire vault with a threat letter sent by some thief. So simply, Nagisa and Kamizuka just had to guard the vault while she was away for a live concert. Now before the main stuff, let's just sidetrack a little bit and talk about like this one scene, since we're on the topic of like live concerts. Let's talk about this one scene in episode 3 we had. Like in this one scene, like it was basically about Yui having a rehearsal performance for her live concert, I guess, and then Kamizuka was out here acting like some buck wild fool, cheering on Yui as she just sings randomly. It's like since like I don't know, like he throughout the week he binged her live concerts or something. I'm not exactly sure how to explain this. My explanation is just so half-assed. I'll just play the clip and for you to see, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, this shit honestly just had me dying the first time I saw this scene. But anyways, there's some other things that happened afterwards which I again can't be bothered to explain. So at the end of this episode, truth is exposed that Saikawa is actually lying, which probably leaves up for a lot of interpretation on what she's lying about. But that is for the next episode, and that is not what I'm gonna be talking about today. So if you want to find out what she was lying about, find out next time on Detective Ballsy. I'm sorry, that was a bad joke. Anyways, after all these 3 episodes, I've seen, well, technically I've seen like the first 5 or 6 episodes, but like, we're only talking about the first 3 episodes here. After the first 3 episodes, from what I've gotten so far, my thoughts are just really mixed on this. Episode 1 was just a pretty solid start. It was off to a like good start with good vibes, but then later on they just mixed up everything with going to the present, having a mini arc for Nagisa and then Yui, and then just suddenly going back to the past without any pre-context, which really just makes the show just feel inconsistent with what it's trying to do and like how it's trying to handle the plot. Well, not that I read the light novel though. The light novel could be the same for all I know. But don't get me wrong, I still like the show, but it just has some hidden potential that it decides not to use, which really just strives away to what it could have been, making the story feel somewhat of a hit or miss at times. Hey, you still got some spicy siesta screen time and some action-packed adventures, so that's enough to sell me, especially with the siesta screen time with the beach episode. Therefore, As a final conclusion, I'm giving the show a solid 6.5 out of 10. But since my anime list doesn't have a 6.5 out of 10, I'll give it a 7.